Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is about to radically change the way that we test vaccines. So they're seeing the Washington Post citing a statement from an HHS spokesperson revealing the planned change, and it's stating that all new vaccines will be required to undergo placebo trials, meaning that a control group gets something like a saline shot instead of the actual vaccine, which is something that vaccine skeptics argue would make sure that they're really safe and effective. RFK has actually hinted at this move for a long time, with more recently him claiming on Dr. Phil's show this week that only the COVID vaccine had a placebo.
None of the others were ever tested against placebo. So we have no idea what the risk profile for these products are.
Except, as what I've found from my research is usually the case with RFK, he's just wrong here. Vaccines, they do often undergo placebo testing, and where Kennedy is kind of right, but still not really, is that some types of shots go through a different process, though arguably for a good reason. So for example, when a disease is well understood, like with measles or polio, we already know what the biological response that protects against it is gonna look like. So instead of comparing the real shot to a placebo, scientists can just observe the biological response, what they call a correlate of protection. Also, if a vaccine's already been proven safe and effective once, like with the COVID shot, for example, experts say that we don't actually need to put it through the full shebang of a double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trial every time we update it. And that because when a booster shot gets developed, the fundamentals are basically the same. It's just tweaked for a different strain of the disease. Even Kennedy's HHS understands this because it said that the placebo requirement won't apply to the flu shot, which has been tried and tested for more than 80 years. But then, for whatever RFK reason, it singled out the COVID booster when asked which vaccines may need new placebo trials, even though it already underwent a placebo trial back in 2020. And so for everyone listening, that raises questions about whether the COVID boosters meant for this fall are actually gonna get approved. And notably, when CBS asked FDA Commissioner Marty McCary on Tuesday, he said,
"We're taking a look. I can't comment on any particular application. As you know, we have a bunch of applications for those booster shots. Remember, Major, 85% of American healthcare workers said no to the last COVID booster. So we have a bit of a public trust problem. I think there's a void of data, and I think rather than allow that void to be filled with opinions, I'd like to see some good data."
With then HHS confirming his statement in even less ambiguous terms to the Washington Post, saying, "Using the COVID pandemic as an eternal justification for blanket approvals of new products will not happen under the leadership of Commissioner McCary." And this is, we've already seen the White House throwing up roadblocks in front of at least one COVID shot so far, the Novavax vaccine. With that, notably being the only one that uses a more traditional protein base instead of mRNA, and it's been available under emergency use authorization. With the FDA previously having been on track to grant it full approval by April 1st, according to the Post, but Trump's top officials reportedly paused that process. And this is, they're also reportedly trying to get Novavax to conduct a new clinical trial once it does get approval. So that's pretty much all we know right now, at least as far as that, because HHS didn't specify which other vaccines the placebo rule might apply to, nor did it define what new vaccine means. But another one that experts are afraid RFK will target is the measles, mumps, and rubella, or MMR vaccine, because he has repeatedly cast doubt on its safety, claiming it could cause neurological or autoimmune issues, and on Wednesday he told News Nation,
"Because the MMR vaccine contains a lot of aborted fetus debris and DNA particles."
By the way, just gotta say, that's misleading. The vaccine, like many others, uses decades-old sterile fetal cell lines derived from 2 elective abortions in the 1960s. So it's not like babies are getting tossed into a meat grinder and coming out the other end on a vaccine assembly line. But whatever vaccines he does go after, you have experts fearing that the consequences, they're gonna be deadly, right? Because requiring placebo-controlled trials could delay public access to life-saving vaccines by months, especially for seasonal boosters. Because you see, there's this narrow window of time roughly between June, which is when the FDA directs companies on which strains to prepare for, and September, when the shots are supposed to start going into arms. And if Kennedy is going to require them to undergo multi-year trials, as he suggested may be necessary, then it's not even clear how something like a yearly booster would be feasible. And this is another big criticism of the placebo requirement that we've seen, is that it's just unethical, right? Because you'd have to deny the shot to everyone in the control group, which effectively exposes them to the real disease without any protection. So you have critics arguing that if you're reasonably certain that a vaccine is safe, then it's just unnecessary, especially for children who are vulnerable. But notably, on this topic, when a woman in Dr. Phil's audience asked RFK what advice he'd give to mothers of newborn babies considering a vaccination, he said,
"We live in a democracy, and part of the responsibility of being a parent is to do your own research."
Which is not a shocking thing for RFK Jr. to say, but it is a wild thing to hear when RFK Jr. is the nation's top health regulator, the guy who's supposed to review the research so you don't have to. Which is why you have the likes of Professor David Gorski, for example, the managing editor of Science-Based magazine, telling the Post, instead of just an anti-vaccine activist saying this stuff, now the federal government government, HHS and FDA, is now saying this stuff. That matters. As well as Paul Offit, director of the Vaccine Education Center at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, adding, "You are watching the gradual dissolution of the vaccine infrastructure in this country. The goal is to make vaccines less available and less affordable." And so you have people who have that view saying for RFK, delaying the rollout of the vaccines, it's not a downside of the placebo trials. It is precisely the point. Saying they're trying to hamstring the industry as much as possible, whether out of a misguided sincerity or a quest for political gain. And all of it is part of the reason we're starting to see things like reports saying that scientists find measles likely to become endemic in the US over the next 20 years. Hey, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this clip from the full Philip DeFranco show. And also, a big thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring our Clips channel. Turn your passion into profit over at squarespace.com/filler. Use the QR code. Because whether you're launching a business or a lucrative side hustle, your website is your digital business card. It's the only space where you control the story, no algorithms or distractions. And with Squarespace, it's so easy because they got a ton of stunning professional templates with drag and drop editing that makes site design incredibly simple, no coding required. So get started for free at squarespace.com/Phil, or scan the QR code on screen and use code Phil for 10% off when ready to launch. Squarespace.com/Phil.